Is Daf Yomi is Kiddushin Yud Daled. We're going to start on the bottom of Yud Gimel Amud Beis on the bottom line. The Gemara is discussing. We're actually finally now coming to the last Amud of today's Daf of the first Mishnah, and the Gemara is discussing the concept of the way in which a Yavama, a woman whose husband dies, she has no children, and she falls to Yibum with her husband's brother. That the Mishnah says a Yavama nicknames Babia. So the Mishnah says that the Yavama she completes the marriage through Bia with her brother-in-law. So the Gemara says Babia Minon. What's our source of the idea that the Yavama is acquiring this relationship, that she consecrates the marriage through Bia? The Gemara says Babia Minon. So Amar the pasuk says the Gemara says it's based upon a pasuk. It says that we read this pasuk actually in yesterday's parsha. It says Yavama Yavo Allah, that the Yavama will be with her, and then he marries her. So the Gemara says, but maybe that means, how do we know that's through Bia? Maybe he can marry her the same way that the regular woman gets married, through Kesef and Shtar as well, not just through Bia. Maybe he marries her like everybody does for a woman, for a wife. Kesef, Shtar, and Bia. Gemara says, Lo Sakadaita. We can't assume that that's the case. The Tanya, because it says in the Brisa, Yachayu Kesef Shtar Gomer Ba Kederach Shabia Gomeres Ba. I might think that Kesef and Shtar I might think that Kesef and Shtar are Gomer Ba Kederach Shabia Gomeres Ba. I might think that she's able to complete the marriage through Kesef and Shtar, just like she completes it with Bia. Tamal Omar, it says in the pasuk V'yib Ma, which means Bia Gomeres Ba and Kesef or Shtar Gomer Ba, that she only completes the marriage through Bia, but not through money in a contract. The Gemara says Ve'ema Mai, but I might say, what is V'yima? The Baal Karcha Miyabe. Maybe the word V'yima is not teaching us that it's only through Yibum, but not through Kesef and Shtar, but maybe it's teaching us that the Yibum also can happen against her will. We know that even though a woman, when she's being when there's Kiddushin in general, she has to consent, but by Yibum she doesn't. That it can be done against the will. Maybe that's what we learn out from the word V'yima. Gemara says no. Imkein lemakra V'yavam. It could just say V'yavam. My V'yima shmas minatarti. We're learning both things. We're learning that it can be done A, against her will, and B, also that teaches us that only Bia is the way that she gets married, but not Kesef and Shtar, but not money and contract. And now the Gemara says, what's the next thing? The Chalitza, we had said that a Chalitza is Kones Atzma, that a Yavama is Kones Atzma, B'Chalitza, and also Misa Sabal, also with Chalitza, and also with the death of her husband. So the Gemara says, so how do we know that the woman acquires a release through Chalitza, which is the release from her marriage, and which is where she removes the shoe from her husband's brother and spits on the ground in front of him? How do we know that she is released from this is when she's called a shomeres yavam, and she falls to yibam? How do we know she releases herself through chalitza? The Gemara says it's based upon a pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'nikra shemo b'Yisrael beis chalitza now." It says that when they gather for the chalitza, it says that she spits on the floor, and it says, and his name is called in Israel the house of the chalitza now, the house of the removed shoe. So then the Gemara explains that this pasuk means kivan shacholotz ba now. By the way, this is the second pasuk already, or really the third time we're referencing in our daf already a pasuk we read in yesterday's parsha. It says kivan shacholotz ba now. Once she removed the shoe, hutshol l'kol, she has become permitted to all of Israel to marry. So the Gemara says, well, wait 1 second. Is that we're learning that out from the word Yisrael? Hi Yisrael, is the word Yisrael coming to teach us this idea? By the way, don't we need the word Yisrael to teach us something else? Look at the Tani Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda. Doesn't that mean be Yisrael, but Bezin Shal Yisrael, Bezin Shal Akam? Maybe it's to teach us, and this is tremendous afamina that you would even thought that maybe it's to teach us that it could take place. The chalitza could only take place in the court of the Jews, but not in the court of idolaters. Gemara says, no, we don't need that, because Trei b'Yisrael ksivi. It says the word b'Yisrael twice. It says the word v'nikroshmo b'Yisrael. It also says v'amrami ein yivami la'akim lachiv shem b'Yisrael. So we see that the word Yisrael appears twice. So one is to teach us this idea that she's released all of Israel through the chalitza, and the other that has to take place in a bed in Shal Yisrael, not in a court of the Akum. Gemara says, but don't we need it for the following? That Amar Rabbi Yehuda, for one time we were sitting in front of Rabbi Tarfon, And when we were sitting in front of Rabbi Tarfon, Vasa Yavama, Lachot, and the Yavama came to do the Chalitza, Va'amar Lanu, Anu Kulchem. And he said to us, Rabbi Tarfon said to us, everybody has to respond. Everybody should answer. Va'amru, and they said, Chalot Sanal, and everybody who was there said, remove the shoe, remove the shoe. So we see from here that that's what the word Yisrael is teaching us, that you have to remove the shoe, you have to remove the shoe. That's what it's teaching us, not to teach us this idea that not to teach us this idea that only that she's released only through chalitza. The Gemara says no. V'nikra shemo nafka. No, that we learn out that they have to say chalitza now. That we learn out from the words v'nikra shemo. That everybody has to scream out together chalitza now. Remove the shoe. Remove the shoe. I always had the ability to see this chalitza ceremony, and it is a powerful ceremony to witness. But I don't remember if we all said chalitza now. I don't remember that moment. So the Gemara says that the Mishnah then said that the woman who's a Shomeres Yavam, she requires her release from the marriage, from the being a Shomeres Yavam, from waiting for the Yibam with her brother-in-law, from Chalitza, and from the Misas Yavam, from the death of her husband. So the Gemara says, Minoan, how do we know that? Through the death of her husband, she also requires release. So the Gemara says, well, why don't we learn it out from the fact that it's a Kal V'chomer? My Isha says, just like if there's a married woman, Shehi B'chenek, a married woman, that if she commits adultery, while she's married, she gets chenek, which is one of the deaths from heaven. It's called death from Shemayim. It's strangulation. Misa sabal matirasa, and yet we learned in yesterday's daf that the death of the husband releases her, and she's allowed to marry anybody when her husband dies. Yivama, but if she's just a shomeres yavam, meaning she's waiting for her brother-in-law to do either yibum or chalitza with her, Yivama sheibalav, which is just a regular prohibition, we'll call chicane for sure. She should be released and be able to marry anybody if her yavam dies. So the Gemara says, no, we're not going to say that. We can't say that Kal V'chomer, because we could say Mala Eishes Ish Shekain Yotza Beget. A married woman, she gets free with a get, and so therefore maybe it makes sense to say her husband's death releases her. Tomar Bazu, are we going to say the same thing by this woman? Sheina Yotze Beget. She's now released with a get. How is she released? She's only released with chalitza. Maybe we're not going to say that her husband's death is going to release her. The Gemara says, "Hanami Yotze Bechalitza." Yeah, no, this woman is not only, she goes through not a get, but she goes through the chalitza. So maybe it is a good Kal V'chomer. The Gemara says, no. What's the Kal V'chomer? Elamala Ishakin Ostra Matira. Maybe just like a married woman, that the one who prohibits her permits her, so too for sure. So therefore, you can't make this Kal V'chomer. The Gemara says, Amar Avashi, Nami Osra Matira, Yavam Osra, Yavam Sharila. So the Gemara says, no, this woman, she's also going to be the one who prohibits her, permits her, because the Yavam who prohibits her, the Yavam is going to be permitted her. And so therefore, we're able to say this Kal V'chomer, that if a married woman who gets strangulation, if she's adulterous, she's released with the death of her husband. For sure, the Yavama, who's also for sure, who's just a lav, for sure she should get released with the death of her husband, with the death of her yavam, who's shemeres yavam. Gemara says, we'll try something else, but the Kal V'chomer, Eishes Ish Yotze Bechalitza Mikal V'chomer. We should say a married woman should be released. We have first tried to say, how do we know that a married woman, that a shemeres yavam is released through the death of her husband? Through the death of her yavam, but now we say something else. Let a married woman herself be released through chalitza. She shouldn't require a get. Why don't we say that she's released through this chalitza ceremony? Mikal V'chomer, from a Kal V'chomer. Ma yavama she'ena yotze beget yotze b'chalitza. Yavama, a get can't release her, but a chalitza can. Zusha yotze beget. This woman who herself is released through a get. Eno din yotze b'chalitza. For sure, she should be released through chalitza. Amar Kran. Now we're going to base it upon the pasuk. What does the pasuk say? Sefer Korsa, Sefer Krisus. Again, yesterday's parasha. Sefer Korsa, the Indever Achar Korsa. No, a woman can only be released through a divorce. A divorce releases her, but a chalitza won't release her. Gemara says, another attempt. Yavama Yotza Yotzes Beget Kal V'chomer. Why don't we say that a Yavama should be released through a get from a Kal V'chomer? And what would be the Kal V'chomer? Ma Eishes Ish Shein Yotze Bechalitza Yotze Beget. A Yavama should be released through a Kal V'chomer from a get, just like a married woman who doesn't get released through chalitza, yotzis beget, is released through a get. Zusha yotzis b'chalitza. This woman is released through chalitza. Eino dinsha yotze beget. For sure, she should be able to release through a get. And where it says Amar Kra Kacha, it says, and this is how you release it. through the chalitza ceremony. Kacha the kacha ikuva, and this is essential. This word is essential. The word kacha is tell us that the only way she can be released is through chalitza, not through a get. Gemara says, well, you mean to say just because we have this word mekacha, we're not going to make a kav chomer drasha? Is that what you're saying? Anytime you have a word in the Torah that means that it's essential, you can't have a kav chomer to uproot it. But what about the fact that on Yom Kippur it says goral v'chuka? It says that you choose the animal who's going to be a sa'ir azazel and a sa'ir Hashem, go for Hashem and a go for azazel through a goral, and it says through a lottery, and it also says v'chuka, and it says in those psukim it says that this will be a chuka, that it says v'aysalchem chuka solam, meaning to say that this is the law, which means ikuva. V'tanya v'aso chatas, that goral also chatas, v'in Hashem also chatas. How do you make this animal, this goat, a chatas only through a lottery? But if you just designate it on your own, it doesn't make it a chatas. And you could have said a kav chomer sheyachav alodinu. You might have said a kav chomer mabim malkum sheish shelo kidesh agoral kidesh Hashem. Just like in every other case where the goral doesn't work, but the designation on your own through your own words does designate it. Malkum shekidesh agoral. And din sheikadesh Hashem. I might have thought for sure that if a goral works, so too you can designate it with your own name. Tamalomer vaso chatos. Make it a chatos. A goral also chatos. Ve'en Hashem also chatos. The goral makes it a lottery, but nobody else does it. But the dedication, the sanctification doesn't make it a lottery. We see from here that what's the reason why we don't use the kav chomer? Not because of the word likuva, but not because of the word chuka, but time of the matekra, but only because of the words vaseo chatas, only because the words excluded. But we're not for those words vaseo chatas. We would have indeed been dorish a kav chomer, darshin on kav chomer, afagav dechseve chuka. So we see even though there's a word for ikuva, we can also use a kav chomer. So the Gemara says, Amakra. So okay, the Gemara says we have to learn a different way why we say that the get does not work for Yavama. It says because of law. We write for her, Sefer Creatures. Law, we write it for her, below the Yavama, and not for the Yavama. The Ema Gemara says, but maybe the word law, because of law, means like we saw in Mesachas Gittin, Lishma. You have to write the get specifically for her, not for somebody else. The Gemara says, no, Trelok Sivi. The word law appears in the pasuk twice. It says, because of law, Sefer Krisus. And also it says in the pasuk, which we also read yesterday, Usnea Isha Charon, because of us. So we see that the word law appears twice. It says Usnea Isha Charon, and it says because of us, Sefer Krisus. So since the word appears twice, that's how we know that it's one is to say Lishma, that it has to be written Lishma, and the other is to tell us that Yavama cannot be released through a get. So the Gemara says, now it says that you remove the shoe. Beit chalutza now. Does that mean now immediate achrini lo? Does that mean you can only be released through a shoe and not for any other way? Is that one? So is that what you're trying to say? Guy now is this what you're telling us that the word now means? That she can only be released through chalitza and not through any other way? I mean, don't we need it like the following brisa? Now, it says in the pasuk that she removes his shoe. Now, ainly now, I only know she can remove his shoe. What if it's somebody else's shoe? How do we know she can release it? The Gemara says, na'al riba. The word na'al is extra. Now riba, meaning to say that anybody's shoe as well. It has to be a shoe that a shoe that fits him. It has to be, if the shoe fits, she can use it. But if the shoe doesn't fit, it can't work. And he can't use a shoe that is withering away and the heel of the shoe is no longer there. So the Gemara says, so if that's the case, we see that we're now teaching us that we need to teach us that you can use the shoe of another person, and you can't use it to teach us that the Yavama is released only through chalitza, not through any other way. So the Gemara says, no, imkain nechtov kra na'al. My hana'al shmas minaytarti. We learned from the fact that it says hana'al. We learned two things. We learned that she is released through chalitza, and we learned that the shoe can be his and somebody else's. So now we're up to the second Mishnah finally of Maseches Kiddushin. The second Mishnah, Eved Ivri Nikna Bekesef Uvishtar. And Eved Ivri, a Hebrew, we saw in the first Mishnah how a woman acquires her or how a woman becomes married. But now we're saying how is it Eved Ivri, a Hebrew slave, a Hebrew bondsman, how does he become a slave? How does he become now? What's the Eved Ivri? And Eved Ivri, there's two types of slaves. We said this many times. We have to go over it. There's two types of slaves in the Jewish halacha. What are two types of slaves? An Eved Kanani, who is really considered to be in very many ways similar to the type of slavery that we're aware of. And then the Torah also knows of an Eved Ivri, a Hebrew bondsman, that this is a person who goes free, as we'll see, after 6 years. And this is a person who's not a real slave because he's a complete Jew. And so he eats what you eat, he sleeps where you sleep. And so he's very different. So an Eved Ivri, a Hebrew bondsman, Nikneh, he is. How does he become a Hebrew slave in the first place? Bekesef uvishtar. He's either bought or there's a contract. And he's either bought, and the Gemara is going to explain it, or there's a contract. The Kona Atzmo, but how does he become released? Bishanim, after he serves his years that he has to do, which is a maximum of 6. Uba Yovel, or he's released at the Jubilee year, the 50th year. Uba Giron Kasef, or there's the reduction of money, and then he releases himself by paying the amount of money that he's required to be released. That he pays the amount of money that in order to go free. Meaning to say, if he's bought for $100 for 6 years, and then he worked for 1 or 2 years, so then we calculate how much he made, how much he was bought for each year, and then we deduct that, and then he redeems himself. Yisera of Ama Ivriya. So now there's another type of slave. This is called an Ama Ivriya, a Jewish girl who's sold as a slave by her father. She is only able to be sold under the age of 12. That's when she can be sold as free. So how does she, as a slave? So how does she acquire her release? The Kones Atzma, she acquires her release. Yovel, the Jew, Kones Atzmo Bisimonim. She requires her release in addition to the other ways which the Eved Ivri requires his release, Beshanim, Yovel, and Giron Kesef. She also has another way in which she acquires her release through Simonim when she goes through the signs of puberty. Hanirtza, who's a Nirtza? We learned this at the beginning of Parashas Mishpatim, that this is the person, the Nirtza is the person who he says, I don't want to go free after 6 years. I want to remain a slave to my master. So then he takes his ear and he goes next to the doorpost and they pierce his ear with an awl. So Nikneh, he is acquired. How does he continue to be a slave? Biritzia, when his ear is pierced. The Kones Atmo, but how does he become released? He doesn't become released through Shanim. And he doesn't become released through Kasef. He can't get this 6 years, and he can't be released through money. So how is he eventually released? B'yovel, only with the Jubilee year, b'misas adon, and with the death of his master. So the Gemara says, Eved Ivri, nikneh b'kasef, mino. And how do we know that Hebrew slave is acquired with money? Amar Kar, the pasuk says, mikasef miknaso. If there are many years, emod rabos b'shaneim, l'fiyen yashiv guaso, mikasef nikmaso. If there remains many years into the Jubilee year, so too the slave has to acquire his. So too the slave will basically give money to his master in order to redeem himself. Melamed shenikneh b'kasef. This teaches us that the slave himself was also acquired with money because he pays the money as redemption for the money that had already paid. Gemara says that's not a proof. Ashkan Eved Ivri Nimkar Oved Chavim. That pasuk is only referring to a Hebrew slave which was sold to an idolater. Maybe that's an idolater acquires a Hebrew slave with money. Because since the idolater does not buy, the idolater does not acquire things. Since the idolater only acquires things through money, so therefore the slave is able to acquire things through money. But maybe the Hebrew slave, the Eved Ivri, Nimkar Yisrael, is sold to the Jew, and so the Jew can acquire things in other ways, not just through money, but also through Mashiach or Kesef. Minoan, how do we know that he's also acquired with money? So the Gemara says, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, with respect to Ama Ivriya, the Hebrew slave girl who wants to redeem herself, it says, it says that she redeems herself, meaning to say that the Ama Ivriya redeems herself with It means she repays off the money that she owes, and then she goes free. So we see from here that she pays off the money from which she was bought, and so therefore she was bought with money, and now she can redeem herself. Gemara says, but okay, that doesn't tell us anything about the Hebrew slave. Maybe Ashkan Amma Ivriya. Maybe that's only true about the Amma Ivriya. Since a woman can be betrothed through money, and she can be betrothed through money, so too she can be bought through money. This Amma Ivriya. But Evet Ivri Minon, how do we know it works by a Hebrew slave? Hamakra, the pasuk says, Ki macher lecha achicha Ivriyo Ivriya v'avatcha sheishanim. So it says, when he will be sold to you, your brother was the Hebrew man or the Hebrew woman, and he will serve for you for 6 years. So Makish Ivri Avriya. The pasuk compares the Hebrew slave to a female Hebrew slave. And so we could say that just like the female is acquired through money, so too the male. The Gemara says, Ashka machru bezin. Okay, I understand if the court sells him that it's acquired through money. Because why is the Hebrew slave sold if he stole money and he owes money? He stole something. So therefore, he can't pay it back. He sold against his will to pay off the debt that he's incurred because he stole the money. But mocharat, we know, and how do we know that if a slave sells himself on his own, and he's also acquired through money, and he doesn't have to do any other form of acquisition? Gemara says, Yoav Sachir Sachir. The Gemara says we're going to learn it out from a slave from the fact that it says when a court sells him, Ki Mishneh Sachir Sachir Avadcha. It says the word Sachir. And also it says with respect to somebody who is sold to an idolater, so we're going to compare the two. The selling of the court, it says the word Sachir, and also the other time a slave is acquired. The Gemara says, Sachir. That only works if you have this tradition of this Gzeira Shava, but a Gzeira Shava, comparing two words, there has to be a tradition about it. The one who doesn't have the tradition, what would he say? Amarkai would base it upon the fact that the pasuk says, it says about an Evet Ivri who sold to a non-Jew, v'chitasig yad ger. So it says v'chitasig. Musaf, the extra vav is al inyan rishon. It's adding on to the first concept, and to tell us that somebody who sells himself to a Jew is also sold. And so therefore we learn from just like you're sold to an idolater, you can be sold to a Jew. Gemara says, let's go back to this idea. Who is the one who needs the word v'chitasig? The one who is not dorish, the Gzeira Shava. He doesn't expand the Gzeira Shava of Sachar Sachir. Who's the one who doesn't learn it? The Gemara says, Hi Tanu, it's the following Tanya. We learned the Brisa says that one who is sold for 6 years sometimes sold more than that. As we'll see, however, someone who's sold by the court is only sold for 6 years. Another distinction between one who sells himself and one who the court sells, he cannot have his ear pierced. Whereas Machru Bezdin, where if the court sells him nirtza, if he wants to stay longer, his ear is pierced. Mochar Atzmo Ein Manikim. Well, when the person who sells himself, when he leaves, he doesn't go with severance gifts. They don't give him gifts when he leaves. Whereas Machru Bezdin, but if he's sold by the court, Manikim will. We give him gifts when he leaves. If he sells himself, the master is not allowed to give him a Canaanite slave woman to produce children. Whereas Machru Bezdin, Rabba Moser will Shifla Kananis. If the court sells him, then the master can give him a Shifla Kananis. Rabbi Lezer Omer, Zev Zeh Eno Nimker El Hashesh. Rabbi Lezer says, no, I disagree. He says both of them are only sold for 6 years alone. And Zev Zeh, Nirtzev, Zev Zeh Manikim. Both of them can have their ear pierced, and both of them get the severance gifts. And both, whether he's sold by the court or sold himself, the master can give him a Canaanite slave woman. So what's the disagreement between Rebbe Lazar and the Tanakama? It must be the Tanakama doesn't have this comparison between somebody who sells himself and somebody who's sold by the court, because therefore he doesn't compare the word Sachir. Whereas Rebbe Lazar, Yoav Sachir. Rebbe Lazar does compare the two. No, so Rav Tumi Mishmei Avimi Dabayit says no. The Kuli Alma Yoav Sachir. Everybody does make this comparison. What's the dispute here? My time Tanakama. What's the reason why the Tanakama draws this distinction between one who sells himself and one who's sold by the court. My time down the common Why is it somebody who sells himself can be sold for actually even more than 6 years? Because it's based upon the verse. It says that if you sell yourself, if you're sold by the court, you're sold for 6 years. That one sold for 6 years. Not sold, not if he sells himself. Whereas Rabbi Lazar says that you shall work. If the court tells you, you work to him, but not to his heirs. Whereas the Tanakhama says we have a different verse for that because it says so that he said the other one to teach us that according to the other poets, Rabbi Lezer tell us this that when it says the word avavcha, but by the severance gifts, it's telling us to teach us it's telling to appease the master on this severance pay, meaning to say don't be upset that you have to pay him, and so that's all it's teaching us. So now the Gemara is going to go on and discuss why the Brisa continues to talk about the distinctions between one who sells himself and one who sells the courts. But God willing, we'll pick that up in the next round tonight at 7:20, and then God willing again tomorrow morning, regular schedule. Yasher koach to everyone. Yasher koach.